"You're not my real mother anyway." That was the sentence. Not loud, not angry, just empty. And somehow that made it worse. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. I remember standing there, one hand still resting on the back of the kitchen chair, as if I had forgotten what I was about to do. The kettle was still warm. The morning light hadn't shifted yet. Everything looked exactly the same. Except it it wasn't. Have you ever heard something that didn't feel like a shock, but more like confirmation? That's what it was. I looked at him, Halven, 38 years old, the boy I raised since he was 4, the boy who used to hold onto my coat so I wouldn't leave him at school too long. And now he stood in my doorway, suitcase half unzipped, irritation already written across his face, like he owned the air in the room. He wasn't supposed to be back. No call, no warning, just arrived. "I need to stay here for a while," he had said earlier. Like it was already decided, not asked, stated, and I let him in. Of course I did. That's what I had always done. But then came the comments. Small at first. "This place hasn't changed. You're still doing things the same way." I forgot how outdated everything feels here. And I listened. I always listened until he said it. "You're not my real mother anyway." No buildup, no hesitation, just a clean cut. So I went quiet, not because I didn't have something to say, but because in that exact moment, I realized something far more important than any response I could give. I nodded once. "Okay." That's all I said. "Okay." Do you know what happens when someone spends decades building a life around you and then suddenly stops? You don't notice it right away. Halvan didn't, because while he was upstairs unpacking like he belonged there, I made 2 phone calls. Then I opened a drawer I hadn't touched in years. Inside was a folder, plain, organized, waiting. By the time the sun started to set, I had already decided something he wouldn't understand until it was far too late. Because if I wasn't his real mother, then I had no reason to keep playing the role. And this time, I meant it. You would think a sentence like that would be the worst part. It wasn't. The worst part was how easily he said it. As if the last 34 years had been some small favor I'd done on a rainy afternoon. As if raising him had been temporary, convenient, replaceable. I didn't argue. I didn't chase him up the stairs demanding an apology. I already knew apologies given too late usually aren't for the wound, they're for the consequences. So I let the house stay quiet. That silence gave me room to remember. I met Halvin when I was 38. His mother, my cousin Saris, was younger than me by nearly 12 years and forever drifting from one disaster to the next. Bad men, worse decisions. Rent unpaid, electricity cut off. Every time someone thought she had finally hit bottom, she found a trapdoor beneath it. Then one afternoon, she showed up with a 4-year-old boy and a split lip, dropped him at my place, and said she'd be back on Sunday. She never came back. At first, it was temporary. A week, then a month, then school forms, doctor visits, winter coats, nightmares in the middle of the night. Halven was small and watchful then. He didn't cry much. That was what broke my heart most. Children should cry when they're scared. He acted like he already knew nobody was coming if he did. So I became the one who came. I signed guardianship papers first. Years later, adoption papers. Quietly, No balloons, no family dinner, just ink drying on documents in a cramped office while Halvin sat beside me, swinging his legs, asking if we could get soup afterward. He called me Ma before any judge ever made it official. That was the truth of it. Not blood, not ceremony, time. Years of packed lunches, fevers, school meetings, braces, part-time jobs, college forms he never finished, loans I helped cover, mistakes I softened, disasters I cleaned up. I built my whole life around making sure he never felt abandoned again. And for a long time, I believed he understood that. But over the last 10 years, something in him hardened, slowly, almost invisibly. He started telling stories about his childhood that shaved me out of them. Started saying things like, when my real family fell apart, as if I had been some neighbor who loaned him blankets. Then came the borrowing. Money for rent, money for repairs, money for just 1 month. Always urgent, always temporary, never repaid for long. And now he was back in my house, tossing his bag by the stairs like a man returning to property he assumed had been waiting for him. That afternoon, while he showered upstairs, I walked past the hallway table and stopped at the drawer beneath the lamp. Inside was the folder with every deed, policy, and legal paper I'd kept in perfect order for years. My hand rested on it for a long moment because Halvin thought the cruelest thing he had done was insult me. He had no idea. He had just talked himself out of everything. By the next morning, I was already finished deciding. Halvin, on the other hand, was just getting started. Do you still make coffee this week? He said, barely glancing at me as he sat down. I placed the cup in front of him anyway. Same mug he used when he was 19. He didn't notice. Habit, I said. He took a sip, grimaced, and pushed it slightly away. Yeah, you've got a lot of those. Small things, constant things. Each one said casually, but stacked together, they built something heavier. Have you ever watched someone slowly erase you while sitting right in front of you? That's what it felt like. You could have upgraded this place by now, he added, looking around. I mean, what are you even saving for? I met his eyes then. Stability. He laughed. Not kindly. That's one word for it. Then came the sentence that mattered more than anything else he had said so far. When you're gone, this is mine anyway. You might as well start treating it like that. There it was. Not grief, not fear of losing me, expectation, ownership. I didn't respond right away. I simply folded the dish towel in my hands and set it down neatly on the counter. You've already decided that? I asked. He shrugged. That's how it works. No hesitation, no doubt. That's how it works. And in that exact moment, something inside me settled into place. Not anger, not sadness, clarity. You should go out today, I told him calmly. Get some air. He raised an eyebrow. Why? Because I'll be busy. He didn't question it. He never questioned anything that didn't immediately benefit him. By noon, I was sitting across from Draxel Venn, my attorney of nearly 20 years. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. He never did. You're certain? He asked after I explained. Yes. No conditions? No delayed transfers? No. He studied me for a long moment, then nodded. Then we'll proceed immediately. And we did paper after paper, signature after signature. The house transferred into a charitable housing trust under my authorization. Accounts restructured, access removed, beneficiaries updated. entirely. Every legal tie Halvin assumed he had dissolved in a matter of hours. Clean, final, documented. By the time I stood up to leave, there was nothing left for him to inherit, nothing left to claim, nothing left to assume. When I returned home, he was sprawled on the couch, scrolling through his phone like the world hadn't shifted beneath him. Hey, he said without looking up, what's for dinner? I paused in the doorway, watching him for a second longer than necessary. Then I walked past him. No idea, I said. That evening, I placed a single envelope on the dining table. No name, no explanation, just wait. Because inside that envelope was the moment his future would split into. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was unsure, but because I was finished. Have you ever reached a point where there's nothing left to debate? No back and forth in your mind, no maybe tomorrow, no hesitation, just a clean, quiet end. That's where I was. By morning, I had already packed one suitcase, clothes, documents, a few personal things, nothing sentimental. I've learned something over the years. Objects only carry weight if you let them. And I was done carrying anything unnecessary. Halvin didn't notice at first. He was in the kitchen again, leaning against the counter, tapping on his phone. Morning, he muttered. I nodded. No tension, no performance, just distance. I placed my keys on the counter beside him. The soft clink made him glance up. What's that for? He asked. I won't be needing them, I said. That got his attention. He straightened slightly. What do you mean? I met his eyes then, calm, steady. I've handled everything. A pause. A flicker of irritation crossed his face. Handled what, exactly? I didn't answer directly. Instead, I gestured toward the dining table. There's an envelope there, I said. Read it after I leave. He let out a short laugh. Why are you being dramatic? Dramatic. I almost smiled at that. I'm not, I said. I'm being precise. And then I picked up my suitcase. For a brief second, just a second, I wondered if he would stop me, ask a real question, say something that sounded even remotely like concern. He didn't. Where are you going? He asked. But it wasn't worry, it was inconvenience. Out, I said. And that was enough for him. So I walked to the door, opened it, stepped outside, and closed it behind me. No pause, no turning back. Just the quiet click of something ending exactly when it needed to. I stood there for a moment, breathing in the air like it belonged to me again. Then I walked away. Inside the house, Halvin stayed where he was for a while. I know him well enough to picture it. He probably rolled his eyes, maybe muttered something under his breath. Then, eventually, curiosity would win. He would walk to the table, pick up the envelope, open it without care. At first, he'd skim it. That's his habit. Fast, dismissive, confident. He already understands everything. But then he'd slow down because the words wouldn't match his expectations. Not even close. And somewhere between the second and third page, his expression would start to change. Confusion first, then disbelief, and finally, something much heavier. Because by the time he reached the bottom of that document, he wouldn't just realize he was wrong. he would realize he had already lost everything. The last line in that document was the only one that truly mattered. Occupancy subject to review by the Mornay Housing Trust within 14 days. 14 days. Not a warning, not a suggestion, a deadline. Everything before it explained the structure, how the house had been legally transferred, how ownership was no longer personal, how all financial ties had been cleanly severed. But that final line, that was reality setting in because it meant Halvin wasn't just mistaken, he was temporary. And for the first time in his life, there was no one left adjusting things behind the scenes to keep him comfortable. I imagine the moment it fully sank in. The second reading, slower, careful, the shift in his breathing, the way his posture changed as the certainty drained out of him. There's a particular silence that follows realization. Not loud, not dramatic, just heavy. He called me. Of course he did. Once, twice, 5 times. I didn't answer. Not out of cruelty, but because there was nothing left to discuss. Everything I needed to say had already been signed, witnessed, and filed. Within 3 days, the trust reached out to him. Formal, polite, unemotional. They scheduled an inspection, reviewed occupancy terms, asked for documentation he didn't have. Savings, minimal. Long-term plan, none. Legal claim, zero. The assumptions he had been living on for years unraveled quickly when faced with paperwork. Relatives didn't rush in to help him, not because they didn't care, but because there was nothing stable to step into anymore. No shared asset, no expected inheritance, no foundation, just him. And the consequences of believing something was his peace without ever securing it. As for me, I relocated quietly. A coastal town, smaller than the one I left. I rented a modest place overlooking a stretch of gray-blue water that never stayed the same color for long. No shared accounts, no obligations, no background tension waiting in the next room, just structure, space, silence. The kind of silence that isn't empty, but earned. One evening, I sat by the window with a copy of the documents in my lap, not to reread them, but to acknowledge them. A full stop. Not revenge, not punishment, completion. Halvin wanted to define what I was to him. And in the end, I allowed him to, back in that house, I know the envelope stayed on the table longer than it should have because some sentences don't fade quickly. You're not my real mother anyway. He said it once, carelessly. But now, for the first time, he understood exactly what it meant.